I guess my career started in HR. I worked for 12 years in HR in the UK and then Australia, and then went back to uni and did some more org psych, and then set myself up in a small consultancy back here in Perth, which I ran for 35 years. I've just retired, which is very nice. And obviously, I started out doing a lot of training in the HR area, but then moved in really to, I guess, my passion area, which was much more leadership development work, and doing that with very mixed groups, predominantly a lot of men in managerial and senior managerial roles.
Hi, my name is Jennifer de Vries. I'm a gender strategy expert and an organisational development consultant. And my passion really is around helping organisations to be or to become more gender equitable, more diverse, more inclusive, where all staff really get the opportunity to thrive and make their best contribution. And I do that, I partner with organisations, assisting them to customise strategic, research-informed, data-driven, customised sort of approaches to building these more equitable and inclusive workplaces. Look, this is a conversation that we have to have at the beginning of each program. Why are we just women here, and what about the men? And it has changed in flavour over the 25 years, but I guess we've always been very, very clear that it's never about fixing the women. And it's also not about helping women better fit into toxic workplaces. So we really try and take advantage of women-only space in how we design the program. But we also can see how providing that safe women's place is a real boost to the women. And one of the immediate benefits that we see is that all the commonalities emerge, and all of that sense of, oh, it's not just me, right? There's a kind of communal sort of sigh of relief. Okay, it's not just me that gets interrupted in meetings. It's not me that this happens to. And straight away, what we are starting to build there is a sense of, hang on, it's the system, it's the culture, it's the structures, it's the way workplaces are designed that's creating some of our experience.
One of the things that has changed over time, and some of that comes from my experience of working in mixed groups, is when we started working together, we would present leadership theories, the things that seem to be, good to great and transformational, and, the various theories. But obviously, I increasingly realised when I was working with mixed groups that some of the behaviours that are, assumed within those theories simply don't fit for women. The mantle of leadership had such a masculine construct that it was inhibiting and difficult. Women couldn't go back to their workplaces and try out some of those behaviours because they wouldn't be received in the same way. So my answer to the women-only space could be based on, a million examples, but two examples come to mind from work we did with women in policing, where a woman who would have been well into her 30s, a sergeant, finally in one of the sessions where, obviously we're in an all-women program, and she broke down in tears, realising that in all her time in policing, she had never worn a skirt. She'd felt she had to be in pants. She'd learned to swear like a trooper. And she was prepared to put up with an awful lot of the sexist rubbish that was going on in the various parts of the policing organisation. And she had, for the first time in this safe place, she was actually able to look at what damage that had done to her capacity to step forward as herself.
It's really interesting how organisations understand leadership and understand what the dominant idea of leadership that they're modelling and rewarding and perpetuating, I guess. And there's so much work that can be done really to broaden out that and to revision that and to rethink it. And it doesn't serve any of us if that's thought of really narrowly. It really does need to be expanded. Any of the leadership offerings that HR or the OD departments or whatever are offering can do that same exploration. How is power exercised? Who gets listened to? What kind of leadership are we rewarding? What's happening from a gender perspective? What are we doing? How does the chair of the meeting behave? What's acceptable? What's not? So there's a lot of richness, I guess, to be had in opening up those conversations. I often think of sort of meetings as microcosms of the macrocosm of the organisation. So I think that's a really interesting place sometimes to start, to see the culture, to see the how it plays out, how people interact with each other, the in groups, the out groups. So that's kind of a really nice place actually to unpack what's happening in the leadership space as well, who's got a voice at the table, who hasn't, and so on.
A couple of the things that we've introduced that I think do build bridges into the organisation in ways that are helpful is we have introduced peer learning groups within the cohort. And they're a la Reg Revan's action learning framework, but they're not project groups. They're not finding a topic that's useful outside the women's roles. It's asking the women to identify what will it be helpful for you to work on more together. And so we have a very organic and messy process where they talk about what they want to really deepen their learning around. And so it might be about being more strategic. It might be about handling conflicts with staff more effectively. It might be about, a specific influencing agenda, that thing they want to change. And so the women can form themselves into groups around that same itch. They go back to their workplaces, and as in an action learning model, they try things, but they have this very supportive group within the program to come back to, look at what's happened and identify principles of practice.
It's incredibly important that it's never a standalone intervention. And we've seen this happen, it's a very sort of feel-good kind of intervention, a women's leadership development program, and you tick a box and so on. But it can really backfire because, of course, as the women get more empowered, they're also empowered to leave your organisation. So, and it just doesn't work. The women see it as a cynical exercise as well. So I don't know if there's been much discussion about this, is sort of the advantages of in-house offerings. So what I still see is women going to these 2-day conferences run by external providers, which cover lots of sort of trendy topics, or their leadership programs where they get sent away to do programs with women from all kinds of other organisations. And I guess you can sort of already see from our model that we think the women need to be understanding their organisation and their culture, and they can do that best together. And then you can connect their development to the broader sort of culture change agenda. And we've seen how important that building that cohort is, and that network, and with repeated programs building a larger and larger network of women who understand the issues, have the sort of literacy around their organisation, who have a bit of shared language. They bump into each other at a meeting and they go, oh yeah, I saw your idea was passed over, so I can bring it back up and make sure it's attached to your name. They can support each other.
In one of our programs, the participants have a week with senior people, with a senior person. So they have some degree of choice, obviously. The senior staff have to be prepared to be available. And then the person arranges to spend a week, so that the participant in the program goes to meetings with them, hangs out with them in their, as they take calls and develop strategies and plans or whatever. And as I said earlier, it gives the women a very important view of how things happen at much more senior levels in the organisation. I think it opens the possibility of maybe I could be there in a way that, perhaps doesn't happen easily. Less is more. Less theory, more of the women's stories, leave as much space as possible to be working with their examples. We offer frameworks for them to think through, how they want to influence a situation, how they might want to deal with a difficult staff member or whatever. So we're not devoid of input, but it's absolutely been responsive to the issues that seem to be current and most pressing for the women. And I suppose the other thing I've learned, and not just in dealing with Jen and I working with the women's program, is that your relationship with your client is crucial to good outcomes. Being able to negotiate with your client an understanding of what you're offering and how you think it's best going to happen, so that can then be dovetailed with the needs of the organisation, and that they understand, I think, their responsibility in making this offer to the women, that it doesn't end when the programme ends.
One of the things we've learnt as well is that it may be a women-only program, but that doesn't mean that you don't want to engage with the men. And I think we've found lots of creative ways of engaging with men and making it a shared learning experience. There's other ways that we haven't explored yet that could work well in this space. We could have had parallel sessions with men looking at gender and intersectionality, for example, and then bringing those men and women together to have those courageous conversations, which we've had around race, but we haven't really yet had around gender in the workplace. It's very unusual for men and women actually to talk about gender from their respective experiences.
The thing probably that we recognise as we progressed increasingly was around power and politics. I think that's become more foreground. And I suppose we've also learned that it's still a really tough gig for women. Organisations are still tougher on women than they are on the men.
One of the things I noticed a lot when we first began, and as Maggie mentioned, that was at the University of Western Australia, was that many women were really operating in what I came to term a climate of discouragement. So they were told not to apply for a promotion yet. They were discouraged from stepping up. They were told, no, you're not ready yet. You've got to do this more or that more or the other. And I know from some of the other leadership development work I did and some of the research that I did actually there as well, that men were being encouraged. They were being tapped on the shoulder. They were being told, no, you're ready. Yeah, no, go for it. But what I noticed this time is that there was kind of an intersectional disadvantage. So it was women, a different cultural background, or women who also had a disability, or women who had a chronic illness. But there still were women in this climate of discouragement where really you could say, no one cares about my career. No one cares about them. So they're super talented women. They're isolated. They're lacking support. They're not necessarily being discouraged, but they're not being encouraged either. And they're not being mentored and sponsored. And that's an enormous waste of talent. So while, this is way more on the agenda now than it was 25 years ago, I think organisations are putting much more work into this space. We still recognise that there's a long way to go.